Hey everyone, my name is Gothix and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I like talking about things that, upset people. Not intentionally, it's just the consequence of me using my brain. But I like to talk about things on this channel that not everyone agrees with. But I found this video. Actually, someone sent it to me. Thank you, John. And this video really ties into a lot of the craziness that we're seeing in the world. And it's an anti-fascist education film that was made in 1947. And I scanned a little bit in this video and woo! There's a lot to unpack, so sit back, relax, and enjoy watching this video explain how we're essentially repeating history because humans are dumb and never learn from our mistakes.
Henry here got on the train with $200. He couldn't see any harm in a friendly game of cards. What if the other men were strangers? And take Joe Collins. He's got a nice wife at home. But he met this girl at the bar, and she looked after the first couple of drinks.
You know, it's so fascinating to me how quickly and how easily people are willing to put complete trust in strangers. So just because someone says nice things and they give you compliments and they just, bat their eyelashes, all of a sudden you put total trust in these individuals. This is a film made in 1947. And people are still getting catfished, getting scammed, and it's wild that human beings haven't figured it out. Like they keep falling for the same nonsense. And if you look at this scenario from a larger perspective, let's say putting your total trust in politicians, oh man, now you're really in trouble.
There's a good old-fashioned word for people like us. We call them suckers.
Suckers.
And there are other people. People who stay up nights figuring out how to take away what they've got.
Do not enter the path of the wicked and do not walk in the way of evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on, for they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. So the scenario in this opening video is this guy knows he has a wife at home, but instead tries to hook up with some lady at the bar, gets robbed in the process, and then the narrator says there are some people that will lose sleep trying to figure out how to manipulate suckers.
Take Mike here, for instance. He's got everything. He's young, he's healthy, got a job, and he's got plenty of food. Big factories to make things a man can use. Big cities to do the business of a big company. And people. Lots of people. Enough to work the farm and build the factories, dig the mines, and run the business. All kinds of people. People from different countries with different religions, different colored skins. Free people. They can live together and work together and build America together because they're free. Free to vote, to say what they please, go to their own churches, to pick their own jobs. Yeah, Mike's got something, all right. He's got America. But there are guys who stay up nights figuring out how to take that away from him.
I happen to know the facts. Now, friends, I'm just an average American, but I'm an American, and some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil. I see people with foreign money. I see Negroes holding jobs that belong to me and you. Now I ask you, if we allow this thing to go on, what's going to become of us real Americans?
I've heard this kind of talk before, but I never expected to hear it in America.
This fellow seems to know what he's talking about.
What are we real Americans going to do about it? You'll find it right here in this little pamphlet. The truth about Negroes and foreigners. The truth about the Catholic Church.
Do you believe in that kind of talk?
I don't know, makes pretty good sense to me.
And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without Negroes, without alien foreigners, without Catholics, without Freemasons. You know these people.
What's wrong with the Masons? I'm a Mason. Hey, that fellow's talking about me.
You know, I find it so interesting that a lot of people who seem to be on the Marxist, communist, socialist bandwagon is that they subscribe to a lot of ideas that sound good on paper without realizing that a lot of these ideas that they advocate for will eventually affect them as well. It's like someone who pushes for censorship or to raise taxes, like tax the rich, right? It's like they don't realize by giving the government more power and more authority and pushing for more legislation, they're not exempt from these rules. It's going to come back and bite them right in the big behind, but they don't realize it because they're sort of on this self-aggrandizement high. You know, I'm doing a thing. I'm helping. I'm fighting for a better future, a better country. Got to get rid of all the people until you realize that they're also talking about you. And so this guy is like, wait a minute, I was in agreement until you said this particular thing. And it's unfortunate. A lot of people don't wake up until it's right on their doorstep. But the other thing I wanted to point out is I can always tell when there is some type of an ulterior motive behind someone like this who's standing up on a soapbox and just rah, 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 about how bad America is. You see it a lot when people on the left criticize America, and then people on the right will be like, all right, well, just move, right? If America is so racist, what's stopping you from getting on a boat and going somewhere else? Because we all have some ability to make change on a personal level. It starts with the individual. What am I going to do to contribute towards a better society instead of saying we got to get rid of this, and this? There's something to be said about people who want to destroy instead of create. And you see this a lot with communists and socialists and Marxists. They just complain about everything, blah, 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 not realizing they're benefiting from the literal policies that are allowing them to stand on that soapbox and complain.
Hey, that fellow's talking about me.
And that makes a difference, doesn't it?
These are your enemies. These are the people who are trying to take over our country. Now you know them. You know what they stand for. And it's up to you and me to fight them. Fight them and destroy them before they destroy us.
You know, this sounds very familiar. I could be wrong, but this sounds a lot like the left-wing politicians who get on mainstream news and try to convince the population that the biggest threat to American democracy are white supremacists, MAGA Republicans, Christian nationalists, transphobic bigots. Oh, and let's not forget the unvaccinated. They're showing you who they want you to perceive as the enemy for a good reason. If you're in a position of power, the government, it is assumed that you will advocate for the betterment of civilization in general, not just a small subset of people. So you should be very cautious to listen to politicians who paint this picture of us versus them, because they're not helping all Americans. They're isolating Americans and saying these are our enemies, and you should really ask yourself why that is.
Before he said Masons, you were ready to agree with him.
Well, yes, but he was talking about... What about those other people?
But in this country, we have no other people. We are American people.
What about you? You aren't American, are you?
I was born in Hungary, but now I am an American citizen. And I have seen what this kind of talk can do. I saw it in Berlin.
What were you doing there?
I was a professor at the university. I heard the same words we have heard today. But I was a fool then. I thought Nazis were crazy people, stupid fanatics. But unfortunately, it was not so. You see, they knew that they were not strong enough to conquer a unified country. So they split Germany into small groups. They used prejudice as a practical weapon to cripple the nation. Of course, that was not easy to do. They had to work hard to do it. We human beings are not born with prejudices. Always they are made for us. Made by someone who wants something.
Yep.
Remember that when you hear this kind of talk. Somebody is going to get something out of it, and it isn't going to be you. This is not classroom theory. I saw it happen.
Divide and conquer is one of the oldest tricks in the book. And it's so sad to me that Americans, or not all of them, but a big chunk of them, can't look back in history and compare the similarities between how America is so divided to how people were divided during the Holocaust, during the Cultural Revolution, or really any other event in history. You'll usually find divide and conquer. And what I tell people is that the method that's being implemented in America is more palatable for Americans. So what they do is they use diversity as the Trojan horse for this method. And they'll say, okay, we want to push for more diversity and inclusion, but that's just the packaging. What's inside is division. It's divide and conquer. So first you have to divide the population by presenting something that looks appealing, it looks good, it looks nice. Yes, who wouldn't want diversity? Who wouldn't want inclusion? Now here's the thing, is that you can't force diversity, nor can you force inclusion. There will always be people who do not want to accept certain groups of people into their particular circle, and that's just how it is. There's nothing you can do about it. No amount of marching, protesting, legislation is going to change that. Let me give you an example. If we take trans rights, or really LGBT community in general, I know there's a lot of letters, all right, so bear with me. These two groups, or really it's technically the same group, is always going to be at odds with Bible-believing Christians, not fake Christians who conveniently neglect to read 80% of the Bible because it's irrelevant to them. But Bible-believing Christians will always be at odds with sin, period. And LGBTQIA falls into that category. So now if you take this narrative that you must accept this community, you are essentially creating agitation between these two groups, instead of group one, the gay group, recognizing that not everyone is going to accept my behavior. It is what it is. Another example that I can give you is this concept of anti-racism. Now, if you're not familiar with this, let me explain. It's this idea that we have to constantly, always be fighting to dismantle racism, or white supremacy, or institutional systemic discrimination. There's a lot of terms, but we have to constantly be fighting to be an anti-racist in order to help people who have been victimized by this racist system that we're living in. It sounds like a science experiment. But the problem with that is there are millions of people, myself included, that don't care to speak about racism every 5 seconds. In fact, it's completely irrelevant to me, because if someone doesn't want to include me, then that's their business. I'm not going to force them to change how they feel. Now, the narrative of anti-racism is that unless you're actively fighting against these injustices, these invisible barriers of systemic racism, then I'm also a racist. I am somehow uplifting the same system that is oppressing my Black brothers and sisters. So you see the conflict here. I don't care about this conversation. And anti-racism says, no, you're the bad guy because you're not actively fighting against this machine. But let's continue and see what else this guy has to say.
I saw it first in Berlin in 1932. 5 young men that I knew were standing in the crowd listening to the Nazi speaker. Eric was a Catholic. Anton, a student of mine, was a Jew. Heinrich owned a small hardware store. Karl was a farmer. And Hans was an unemployed metal worker.
To all you Aryan Germans, I say it is time you inherited the nation which rightfully belongs to you. To you alone belongs the glorious destiny of the greater Germany. The Nazi Party will provide land for the farmer, work for the worker, and profits for the small businessman. Who is getting these things now? The Jew. The Jew who has stolen our nation and our birthright. Who makes all the money and takes all our jobs? The Jew!
So, if you're in America, I want you to swap this narrative out. Take out Jew and put in white supremacy. And on the oppressed side, I want you to put in Black Americans. And you see, it sounds identical. Black America built this nation. You're hearing that a lot lately. So just swap it out. Swap it out with a different category, and you'll see that the narrative hasn't shifted. It's just arbitrary.
The Jew, he must be shunned. He must be ostracized. He must be eliminated. And the Catholics, we don't want our great nation run by a foreign church. We Germans will know what to do with these people when the time comes. They and their faith must be destroyed. Then there are the Freemasons. In Germany, we have no place for secret societies. There will be only one society, and that is the Nazi Party. There will be no secrecy about that in the new Greater Germany.
One by one, he attacked each minority and he split them off one from the other. These men were all fellow Germans when they came here today. Now they were split into rival groups.
Yeah. So a few things I want to comment on that particular clip. First of all, I don't trust the Freemasons. Okay. I've said this before, but my husband was on the verge of joining the Freemasons. And it's so interesting that it was like a week before he was set up to go to his, I don't know what it's called, like an initiation dinner. A week before that happened, he gave his life over to Christ. And I thought it was the perfect timing. But in any case, it's interesting because they're villainizing Freemasons, they're villainizing Catholics, and regardless of what the core belief system is within these two entities, the overall message here is we don't want people being influenced by anyone else because the Nazis want to influence. So again, take Nazi out, put communists in, it's the same thing. We need to villainize these groups of people. You see a lot of anti-Christian rhetoric happening in America. Why is that? It's because they don't want these people to be influenced by the word of God. We want to influence these people. And the other thing that the narrator pointed out was the fact that they were all Germans, and then all of a sudden, now they're in their own different categories. And again, same thing is happening in America. We are all Americans, but now it seems as though a lot of people are at odds with each other and they're looking at the world through an us versus them mentality. I don't know if you guys remember, but during a lot of these, peaceful BLM protests, a lot of protesters were stomping on the American flag, lighting it on fire, just bad flag, bad America. But if you wipe your butt with a pride flag, now you're the enemy. You know this country is in trouble when you see state buildings decorated with the pride flag, because the pride flag represents way more than sexual liberation. The pride flag represents division, because if you go to a state building and you see the American flag as well as the pride flag, really the pride flag in this scenario is redundant, because the American flag is supposed to encompass everyone of all walks of life, of all backgrounds. If you're an American, period. So when you ask people, where's the straight flag? They're not going to put it up. Why not? Why wouldn't you put up a straight flag? Which, by the way, I don't know what that looks like. And trust me, I really don't want to see it. But as an example, you don't really see that. It is assumed that if you live in America and you're an American citizen, you support America. Otherwise, I don't know why you're here. But if you have the pride flag, that's assuming that everyone else subscribes to it. For as much diversity and inclusion as it relates to the LGBT community, we see it everywhere. You would think that the world would be more united on this topic. It turns out the world is getting angrier. And it's because you're propping this thing up and saying you need to support this. Yeah. I don't know what to tell you, but it's not going to happen. All right, let's continue.
These men were all fellow Germans when they came here today. Now they were split into rival groups, suspicious of each other, hating each other. They were being swindled, all of them. But the man who was really being fooled was Hans. He was pure German, according to Nazi standards. To him they promised everything, and he fell for it. That's how Hans became a Superman. They gave him a uniform and they pumped up his ego. He wasn't just a little fellow out of work anymore. He was a member of the master race. Hans and thousands of others like him, all playing a sucker's game. They gambled with other people's liberty, and of course they lost their own. A nation of suckers. Hitler needed these people. There was lots of work to be done. There were
So, the pure-blooded Germans were propped up as being superior. Basically, their ego was filled, and Hitler used these people for his agenda. Now, if we look at this through America, what group of people do you see getting propped up a lot lately? Propped up, supported, paraded, protected. They're a protected class. Let me know in the comments if anything is ringing a bell.
There were trade unions to be smashed, because unions were organized and might offer resistance. There were many political parties in Germany. These the Nazis destroyed. They were determined to smash every organization where people might band together and resist them. There were Jews to be beaten and killed. The Jews were not powerful, but they were a convenient excuse for all the nation's ills. And besides, a Nazi party member could not take over this man's store.
So the Jews were not powerful, but they were a convenient excuse in the process of silencing political opposition, destroying organizations that could ultimately be a safe haven for people to gather and figure out how to rebel against the Nazi regime. Let me continue a little bit more.
Hundreds of Catholics were put in jail because the Catholic Church had strength and could resist the Nazi drive for power.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting for right there. I've said this many, many times before, and I'm going to say it again. If you're someone who gets annoyed whenever I mention God in my videos, I hate to break it to you, but you will never, never fully understand the tactics and strategies that Nazis, fascists, communists, and Marxists use in order to achieve power if you keep avoiding the God conversation. It's literally the biggest missing piece of the puzzle that you keep disregarding just because it sounds weird. I don't want to talk about Sky Daddy. I don't want to talk about him. Logically, it doesn't make any sense. Like, as a detective, you would think that a detective would want to look at all of the evidence and then critically think about the evidence before they form a conclusion. But no, the detectives on YouTube say, I don't want to watch this, unsubscribing. All right, fine, unsubscribe. Best of luck to you. But let me elaborate on why this is so important. Someone who is a true Bible-believing Christian is going to be less susceptible to falling for stuff like this. And it's because, as I said, if you're a true Bible-believing Christian, that means that you are keeping God's commands, which isn't good for Nazis or for communists. Because communists and Nazis and fascists, they want to be in command of you. But the Bible says to obey God as opposed to man. So if we look at this from the perspective of America, I'll give you an example. It's probably an example that most people are aware of by now. Christian business owners. So if you are, let's say, a baker and you have a bake shop and you are a devout Christian, you follow the word of God, a gay couple comes into your shop and this couple says, we're getting married, we need a wedding cake. If you're truly following and obeying God, then you know that marriage is a covenant between a man, a woman, and God, not two men and two women. So what's been happening is a lot of Christian business owners are being sued, and a lot of states have made laws forcing these business owners to compromise on their faith. And this is a way of targeting Christians in a very indirect manner under the guise of the diversity and inclusion Trojan horse, and pairing that with the pride community. And it all starts by feeding someone's ego constantly. And we've been doing this for years, all these pride parades and these drag shows, and now this preferential treatment of trans rights. It's sort of building this narrative that the pride community is untouchable. They're unstoppable. And that's going to keep happening, by the way. I hate to break it to you. If you are a believer in Christ and you read your Bible, then you know what's down the pipeline, all right? So just keep the faith, stay in the word, everything's going to be okay. But yeah, it's going to keep getting worse.
Because the Catholic Church had strength and could resist the Nazi drive for power. They had split the nation into 100 pieces, and then one by one, they had destroyed the pieces. Over these broken pieces, the Nazis rode into power. One party, one nation, one religion.
One party, one nation, one religion. Did you hear that? New World Order, one world currency, one world religion. Did you hear that? Sound familiar?
These men had won their struggle for power. They now ruled all of Germany. But still they had trouble with their oldest and most persistent enemy, the truth. They found that truth does not die easily, and so they decided to abolish truth. One great source of truth is literature, so they burned books, 20 million of them. Many great men in Germany who were spokesmen for truth were jailed or driven from their country. Teachers, writers, scientists. Education was discouraged. In 5 years, college attendance dropped 53%.
Do you guys remember the lockdowns? The COVID lockdowns? You remember that? The illiteracy rate in America was already bad, but then it kept getting worse because kids weren't getting an education. And then eventually the schools reopened, but something was very different. And again, to my ignorance of not being politically awakened to all of this stuff, I didn't realize that the public education system has really been brainwashing people for generations. It's just more overt now. It's more out in the open. And so what are kids learning about these days in school? Gender identity, sexuality, pleasure. Forget about skills and things that are going to equip them to be successful in the real world once they become an adult. No. We're learning about being bisexual. So it's really the equivalent of book burning. Again, not doing it outright, but just replacing actual education with indoctrination, once again, under the Trojan horse of diversity and inclusion. The other thing that this guy mentioned is how a lot of brilliant minds were persecuted and locked up. Why? Again, it's because the truth kept resurfacing. They had to stop the truth from getting out. Now, back in 1947, we didn't have the internet, right? We didn't have all of the avenues of media that we have today. But what do you see? You see a lot of brilliant minds who were only a few years ago supported, respected, but now they're censored. They're deplatformed. They're villainized as a fascist, as a anti-science Nazi bigot. And it's for the same reason that they're doing in this film, or that they've done throughout history, is they don't want the truth coming out. So they have to make sure that they silence these people and they persecute these people and they create enough fear amongst the population so that people who actually believe in the truth will be so afraid to stand up for the truth.
It was forbidden to listen to a British radio program or read an American newspaper. In Nazi Germany, you had to get your information from Dr. Goebbels. He knew what was best for you.
My name is Dr. Fauci, and you must listen to me. And if you do not... If you don't, I will turn you... Why am I speaking Spanish now? I shall send you to the concentration camps. I mean, re-education... quarantine camps. That was a cross between German and Cuban? I'm not sure. Did you get your booster? I need to work on my accent. All right, but seriously, we see Dr. Fauci and the CDC getting propped up as the ultimate authority for information regarding the pandemic. And so what happened to a lot of people who only a few years prior were respected members of the science and medical community? Nope, you're science deniers now. You're fascists. They're just throwing all of these names at these people and deplatforming them to villainize them as crazy people. And it's the same thing that's happened or has happened throughout history, where you had to go to one source of information. Also, there's a reason why the Chinese government, they block out a lot of the internet. The citizens have to use VPN in order to use a lot of the apps that we have access to. Why is that? It's to control the flow of information. So in the same way that the media says, don't listen to this other media outlet because they're spreading misinformation, is the same thing happening in China. It's the same thing happening over here in this video that we're watching. So let's continue. I hope you guys enjoyed my really bad role play, but let's keep going.
The church was one force in Germany still strong enough to proclaim the truth in public. This Catholic priest was arrested the following day on charges of immorality. The Protestant church also continued to try and fight for truth. The Nazis put this man in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
There were others who spoke for truth, and I am proud to say that educators were among them.
Followers of Christ are commanded to obey God and not obey man. So even though it's crazy and there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, I'm still going to speak the truth, because if I deny my Father here on earth, he's going to deny me once I die. And homie, don't play that. And again, they will try to get rid of all religions, but if we're being honest with ourselves, there's one particular belief system as it pertains to religion that gets persecuted a lot in America. And you have to ask yourself why that is. The other thing that he said that I found very interesting is the point about how Christians were accused of being immoral. Interesting. I talk a lot about morality on this channel, if you haven't realized it by now. And I do that not to try and convert you to be a Christian. That's not my job, boo-boo, all right? But I do that to get you thinking. I am of the position that we cannot have objective morality without a moral lawgiver. And if you don't believe in God, then your morality derives from the opinions of other people. If not you, then other people. And that's a bad road you want to be on. And it's no wonder why Christians were and continue to be accused of immorality. And it's because they're attempting to dissuade people from obtaining their moral standards from God and instead rely on people to determine those standards. So the government, philosophers, activists, scientists, other people. The end result is what we have now. It is immoral to deny a woman her right to choose. Choose what? Choose death for her baby. It is immoral for you to not allow your child to express their true sexual and gender identity. How did we get here? We disconnected from God and put all of that authority for morality in the hands of humans. And now we have a situation where we flipped the script and now we're propping up evil as something that's good, and we're taking good and making it evil.
There were others who spoke for truth, and I am proud to say that educators were among them.
And what, may I ask, is an Aryan? I don't know myself. But let us see what our present so-called authorities have to say about it. They say he is tall, slender, blue-eyed, and blonde. There is no Aryan race.
And more important, there is no master race. There are people who may find these ideas convenient, but science cannot support them. There is no scientific proof that there's any correlation between a man's racial characteristics and his native ability or character. In all racial groups, we find the same range of potentialities. We find idiots and geniuses. We find criminals and philanthropists. We must judge each man as an individual and not by the color of his skin or his eyes or by the length of his nose.
And now they're coming to take him.
Come in, gentlemen. It's comfortable.
Yep. They're taking you.
And remember that there is no master race. That is a scientific truth. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying.
All throughout America, there are parents and educators alike that are fighting against this giant propaganda machine that is the public education system. Back when I was in school, I guess the indoctrination was a little bit subtle in comparison to how it is now. At least to me, my teachers were relatively normal. I think I got a decent education. I can read, I can write, I can speak good, you know? But these days, kids are learning about gender identity, sexuality, pleasure, transgenderism, anti-racism. And a lot of these parents and educators that are rejecting this stuff are being accused of fascism. They're being called domestic terrorists, extremists even. And what does that tell you? It tells you that the government wants full control over what your child learns, and that should scare you. So as you see in this video, they're taking away a truth teller. They're taking away someone that is rejecting the propaganda and standing up for what's right, and they're getting him out of there. Why? It's because the truth is a weapon. It really is. It really is. And parents, if you have a kid in public education or even private school, because really they're doing it everywhere. There's no bounds to where these propagandists will go. I would get involved, find out what they're teaching your kid, especially if you're raising your child with core Christian beliefs. I would figure out if they're teaching something that conflicts with that. And they probably are.
And so, for all practical purposes, truth had been abolished in Germany. A lot of my German friends wondered what had hit them. How did it happen? Where did it start? It started right here. And this was where it could have been stopped. If those people had stood together, if they had protected each other, they could have resisted the Nazi threat. Together they would have been strong. But once they allowed themselves to be split apart, they were helpless. When that first minority lost out, everybody lost out. They made the mistake of gambling with other people's freedom. Now let's see how those bets paid off. Karl the farmer was gambling on a better life for himself. What he got was extra hours of back-breaking work, as much as 100 hours a week. He was forced to stay on his land and produce what he was told to produce, because now Hitler was preparing for war. For Heinrich, who owned a hardware store, the bet didn't pay off either. 104,000 small businesses were closed in 2 years.
I don't even need to say anything. You guys already know. A lot of these small businesses are never coming back. Meanwhile, the big box chains were open. Walmart was open, Amazon stayed open. All these places stayed open, but not the private small business mom and pop shops. And as for the farm owner, I'm sure you guys have noticed, or maybe you haven't, because the propaganda machine that is our mainstream media conveniently neglects to talk about how a lot of food distribution plants and farms have just been decimated these last couple of years. mostly due to mysterious fires. They don't want people being self-sufficient. So if you can grow your own food and you have your own plot of land, that's no bueno for someone who wants full control over everyone.
And for Hans, conditions hadn't improved any. He had a job now in the munitions factory, but he worked long hours for little pay. The working conditions grew increasingly bad. And even though he didn't like the job, he wasn't permitted to leave it. And when Hitler decided the time was right, Germany went to war.
Did you hear that? All you communist socialists, we're fighting for workers' rights. That's gonna be you. If you don't like how much money you're making right now, then start your own business. It's as simple as that. But no, all these people do is complain and complain and complain about how little their wages are and the work environment. Boo-boo, if you don't want to work, no one is forcing you to work yet.
Not by declaring war, but by a carefully prepared sneak attack. Once again, Hitler needed Hans to do his dirty work. Hans was an expert at brutality this time, and Hitler had decided to use Hans and his brutality against other peoples, the Czechs, the Poles, the French, the Russians. But in the crucial test of war, Hitler's race theories didn't pay off. His pure-blooded supermen were defeated by the mongrel armies he despised, by the British of El Alamein. By the Russians at Stalingrad. Then on D-Day by American soldiers of every color and religion who smashed across the Normandy beaches and drove on through to the heart of Germany. For the misguided Germans who had swallowed the Nazi bait, the Nazi game did not pay off. The continent of Europe was strewn with millions of German bodies, pure Aryan bodies. And Hans, who was going to rule the world, got only a little patch of Normandy that he could call his own.
All because a small group of people became either fearful or envious. It resulted in a lot of people dying. That's crazy to think about. And if we don't watch our step, that's where we're going to end up. I don't mean to scare people, but legitimately, that's what's going to happen. And as I've said before, we have so much evidence to look at the patterns throughout history of what has led to these types of atrocities. And it's happening right now. So how do we stop it? I have some advice, but I'm going to save my thoughts for the end of the video. Let's continue.
We must never let that happen to us or to our country. We must never let ourselves be divided by race or color or religion, because in this country we all belong to minority groups. I was born in Hungary. You are a Mason. These are minorities. And then you belong to other minority groups too. You are a farmer. You have blue eyes. You go to the Methodist Church. Your right to belong to these minorities is a precious thing. You have a right to be what you are and say what you think, because here we have personal freedom. We have liberty. And these are not just fancy words. This is a practical and priceless way of living. But we must work at it. We must guard everyone's liberty, or we can lose our own. If we allow any minority to lose its freedom by persecution or by prejudice, we are threatening our own freedom. And this is not simply an idea. This is good, hard common sense. Here in America is not a question whether we tolerate minorities. America is minorities. And that means you and me. So let's not be suckers. We must not allow the freedom or dignity of any man to be threatened by any act or word. Let's be selfish about it. Let's forget about we and they. Let's think about us.
That was excellent. Imagine that. This was filmed in 1947 and people are still acting like suckers. So what this guy said at the end of this video was spot on. I love the advice. And if I could add some more advice on top of that, I would say this. Don't be so quick to dismiss information just because you think it's irrelevant or it's inconvenient. That is no different from a detective that dismisses potential evidence just because they don't like it. Like, it's not very logical to do. And essentially, the result of that is boxing yourself in so only certain information comes in. And it's sort of like what the media is doing when they say, don't listen to this channel because it's misinformation. Don't listen to this person because they're a science denier. You're doing the same thing, but you're doing it on your own. Right? So just take in the information and use critical thinking to form a conclusion, but don't be so quick to just dismiss it before you even hear how it connects to the bigger picture. So really quickly, I want to read you two things. And this is from Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13. And it reads, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Not to poke at you, but here's another one. In Proverbs chapter 14, verse 15, it reads, the simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. So don't believe everything is nonsense. Don't believe in this idea of social justice and Marxism just because everyone else is doing it. Really think about it and just don't dismiss things just for the sake of, you believing that you have all the answers. Go into every encounter with the expectation to learn something new. I promise you, if you keep searching for truth, you're going to find it. But yeah, check out Proverbs if you want some more wisdom, because there's a lot in there. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, do me a solid and hit the like and subscribe button. And if you're not following me on Rumble, what are you doing? Go follow me on Rumble for more really bad German Cuban impersonations. Hold on, where's my eye patch? Make sure you click the link in the box below. Something is wrong with me. My name is Gothix, and I'll see you next time. Bye.